If someone is sufficiently irritated by Alert Ready, they will find out how to ignore it. Essentially, they're happy to use any resource that will help them find a missing child. And frankly, if someone publicly disagrees with them, they have said publicly, "That's nice, we don't care. I'm happy that you're dissatisfied, but I'm trying to find a missing child. How about you just go be quiet over there?" The decision might have already been basically made that the public is not capable of realistically responding to more than one sound. And if that is the case, then you just don't do it anyways. Oakley dokley. Today's video is going to be on Amber Alerts, things that are adjacent to Amber Alerts, missing children, which are slightly different, we'll get into that, and the use of emergency notification systems. The reason why this video is being made is because fairly recently in Canada, there was a story of a little boy who was considered a vulnerable person because he had autism, but him being in the vulnerable persons category is the really relevant thing here to the policy, who essentially, as far as I can tell, wandered off, and there was a search for him, and then 2 weeks later, unfortunately, they found him deceased. And the notification sent out to the public for this was delayed for 2 days. And there are arguments around whether or not different sorts of emergency notification systems should have been used to sort of get the word out that he'd gone missing to more people faster. That's what this thing is about. Now, if for some reason the person watching this video is the family of the boy or is a policymaker that's looking at the things that are affected in this right now, I'm basically going to put the argument I'm going to make at the end forward now, because I'm going to explain through what these systems are and a lot of this. And for people who don't know, but if you do know, then fair enough, I'm just going to tell you right away sort of what my position on this is going to be. In reference to Alert Ready and it being used, because I know there's different proposals, Alert Ready is a system that is generally set for public safety measures where there's a significant danger or threat to the entire public. A missing child does not meet this definition. So Alert Ready being used in that way makes it a bit too all-purpose, and I think the alert fatigue risk becomes too significant. So the arguments that you hear coming from emergency managers generally around why we should not put missing children in the Alert Ready system as it stands today, I think are probably valid. However, what we do already do with the Alert Ready system is we do test it. And whenever you do a test of the system, you are risking alert fatigue as well. And you're using the system not to actually alert for an actual event. So what you could do, depending on the frequency of these incidents, is you could actually, as far as the emergency management thing is concerned, utilize the Alert Ready system for the missing children reports, but on the emergency management side, use it as effectively a test, the same way that you would be running a test of the system. Just you have a live event. It's not a live event that would normally be within your scope, but it's a test as far as the data collection is concerned. So just use the events of trying to find missing children as tests for whether or not there's going to be tornadoes and emergency notifications, right? Depending on the frequency there, you could make that argument. That's basically where I'm going to come down on it. And that really comes down to how many tests would you be running in a given jurisdiction? And is it too many for alert fatigue? Or if, frankly, you have the same rough number of missing children in a given jurisdiction that you would have as the number of tests you would run of the Alert Ready system, plus minus like 1 or 2, then just swap one for the other and gain the benefit of putting out notifications for missing children faster, right? That's basically what I'm going to come down on for everybody who knows about this. For everybody else, I might have just said a bunch of words there that you might not be familiar with, so I'm going to explain that out now. So I told you about the case. There was a missing child, unfortunately found deceased, and this sort of spawned the conversations around, well, what are we going to do? Now, people will often say something to the effect of, it's going to take somebody dying for people to care. That sort of phrasing around things whenever, you observe something that should be fixed and you think, well, why haven't we fixed it yet? Often you hear phrasing like that. That is, frankly, mostly true. The reason for that, and I know people might find this is like it's kind of dark, but the reason for that is because a lot of the things that we're focused on fixing at any given day as a society are already things where people are actively dying. So if we're hyper-focused on the healthcare system where you interact with all sorts of other issues, and then you have this other thing where no one, or not no one in this case, but let's take a hypothetical. You have a hypothetical situation where no one or very few people have died versus this thing where you're watching people actively dying all the time. This other thing just isn't as present of mind right now because you're dealing with ongoing crises. It's a similar thing with a lot of other infrastructure, power running, water running, etc. If those things turn off, it actively becomes a serious problem to a huge number of people immediately. So a lot of these more niche issues just don't get the same type of focus that many people would argue that they deserve. So one thing that will happen is when you have sort of like a process failure or a system failure or a perceived process failure or system failure, and it results in the death of a child, because children are generally considered to be special to people, particularly vulnerable, the type of things that people want to have an instinct to protect. It will spur on the motivation to change a system, to fix it, to do that sort of thing. Now, when you're looking at this, there are three sort of proposals that I've seen in general that have come forward to fixing the problem. So the problem being that when the boy went missing, and I'm not mentioning his name specifically because I'm not sure on the degree to which the family wants privacy right now, and I haven't seen public statements on that, so I'm erring on the side of, because this is going to come up pretty close to the events, erring on the side of giving them some privacy, just so you know. That's why I'm not mentioning the boy's name. When he went missing, there was an ask to send an alert out, but because he wasn't abducted, he wandered off essentially. It didn't trigger the Amber Alert system, and I'll get into the specifics of that later, but because of that, it took 2 days. And the argument from the family is essentially that it shouldn't take 2 days, and I'm not sure if it was the argument of the family or if it was the argue of other agencies that check for missing children or try to find missing children. There's a bunch of interested parties in this that want to help find missing children. But anyways, the argument was basically made that their notification should be made earlier. The three different sort of proposals for how you would do that were: one, put the missing children notifications through the Amber Alert system directly. So have Amber Alerts basically work for all missing children, period, not just ones that are abducted. So that's number one. Number two, integrate this within Canada's Alert Ready system outside of the Amber Alerts if you want to leave Amber Alerts reserved for just abducted children. Or three, create a separate system independent of Alert Ready and Amber Alerts for missing children that have not been suspected to be abducted. Create a third system. But all proposals are to create different sorts of systems. I think that there is a general consensus that Canada should do something better on the communications front for communicating missing children. So I don't think there's much disagreement there. It's just how Canada's going to do it that's being debated. Okay, so let's talk about the Amber Alert system, because I think that if you don't know about it or sort of why it exists, it provides some context for this. So Amber Alerts. In January 13th, 1996, Amber Renee Hagerman in Arlington, Texas was abducted. Due to the results of that abduction, the Amber Alert, named after Amber, was made. Amber, in all capital letters, also stands for America's Missing, Broadcast Emergency Response System Program, whatever. But the Amber system has been taken on by other countries around the world. Sometimes it's been renamed to different things, but very often, like in Canada, we still call it Amber. In some countries around the world, even though it stands for America's Missing, etc., we've taken out that definition for it, but we just still call it the Amber system or the Amber Alert system. It exists because a child was abducted, and the results of that were basically America and then other countries saying, you know, we should do something about that. We should create emergency notifications. The way the Amber Alert system is implemented changes depending on the country. In Canada, in order to issue one, 4 categories have to be met. 1, police have to confirm an abduction has taken place. A report has to go into police, and police have to confirm there has been an abduction. 2, the victim, and the word victim here is going to be used because this is now police terminology. Like in the first 8 videos, you'll hear us use the word casualty, but in this case, because an abduction has taken place, victim is appropriate. The victim has to be under the age of 18 or has a proven physical/mental disability. Now, on the physical or mental disability part, the idea here is they have to be what is considered a vulnerable persons. So they have to be considered especially vulnerable, whereas an adult that knows the way of the world and is more easily able to interact with society, and frankly, if there was an attempted abduction, would be reasonably expected to be able to effectively resist, is not going to be in the Amber Alert category. So this is the type of especially vulnerable persons that is particularly vulnerable and is more susceptible to abduction. 3, there has to be a reason to believe that the victim is in danger of serious physical injury. So if there is a dispute on something and a disagreement in custody between 2 parents, and both parents, there's no issues, there's no perceived risk by the police anyways of the child coming to harm, then an Amber Alert is not going to be issued. But if it's, a parent takes one of their kids and there's some reason to think the parent might hurt them, or anybody taking them, but there has to be, they've been abducted, yes, is this like they've been abducted and we think they're going to come to harm? Or is this they've been abducted and then the other parent phoned in the police and said, hey, I'm actually over here. We're just having a disagreement right now. You guys can come over whenever. Like these two things are different, right? It's the person has been abducted. They're particularly vulnerable and there's immediate risk of them being physically harmed. Not necessarily immediate, but there's reason to believe that they could be harmed. And then 4, it is believed that if the information is obtained and then broadcast to the public, so the broadcast itself, it would likely or it could be used to assist in safe recovery of the victim. So just because the person has been abducted and just because they're at risk of being harmed, unless it is believed that the broadcast would actually benefit the situation, you still don't issue the Amber Alert. But when all 4 things are met, then an Amber Alert is issued. Because in this case that spawned this whole thing, the individual was not abducted, it didn't meet the qualification. So even though it was believed that the broadcast would assist them, it did meet the qualification, and police are very, very strict with this. The Amber Alert system isn't just, snap fingers, done. A lot of approvals are gone through. The first step, you determine whether or not it should be basically an Amber Alert according to the criteria. The second thing that happens when issuing an Amber Alert is law enforcement, once they determine that it should be, they send a request to a separate agency. And in this case, they're going to end up sending it to an agency that would then send it to Alert Ready. Law enforcement sends it to another agency to say, hey, we have an Amber Alert. Can you see if we can send this out? Because the local police department can't send something to every phone in Canada. They have to send it to somebody that then filters that. The agency that takes that, reads it, verifies it, and then says, okay, yeah, they approve it, and then they draft the content that will go into the system that will blast this to everybody's phones, TVs, interrupt programs, etc. 4, that request is then sent to NAD, so the National Alert Aggregation and Dissemination Program. It's a subsidiary of the Weather Network in Canada. If you can track hurricanes and track tornadoes or large weather events and then send alerts to everybody's phone of, hey, there's a tornado in your area, sort of that system, they have that all integrated already. So that system is the same system that handles Amber Alerts, and the climatologists, meteorologists, etc. that track all this stuff are really good at sending these push notifications out. So you just use the same system, right? So the request is sent to that system. And then 5, once that has been basically taken by the system formats it, not instantly, but basically instantly, and pushes it to pretty much every cell phone in the country, television networks, live shows get interrupted, radio stations, and it just blasts it out, and then everybody gets the message. It's forced. Now, having said that, you can choose to select where it goes. So if a child gets abducted in, British Columbia and you live in Newfoundland, you're not going to get the Alert Ready notification of the thing that happened in British Columbia because you can select it. You can sub-select very specifically too. Like this system's very, very good at that. Whereas if the United States decided to invade Canada and it affected the whole country, you could do a push notification being like, emergency, the whole country is being invaded. You can scale it up or scale it down depending on how serious the thing is. That's basically how Amber Alerts work. Criteria is met, goes through progression, then it's pushed to whoever it needs to be pushed to. On the Alert Ready system, so I want to talk more about this specifically because in one proposal, it's suggested to solve this problem by integrating through Amber Alerts. Through the other, it's suggested to maybe put through Alert Ready directly. So Alert Ready is central to this whole thing. As kind of alluded before, Alert Ready is Canada's air raid siren. It's Canada's hit the button and everyone hears the message now, force it. Interrupt all programming, override phones. If your phone's on silent, Alert Ready overrides it. If like Alert Ready, you hit it and it goes. It is designed to be obnoxious and intrusive because it's trying to force you to read the message. It's not something that's supposed to be used lightly. It's in the toolbox of communications technology that emergency management professionals have access to. It's basically like the nuke. So imagine like you're trying to kill an ant, and instead of using like your foot, you use a B-52 bomber and you carpet bomb the neighborhood. It's like Alert Ready is very aggressive, and it's good that it exists, right? Like people in emergency management are happy that this exists because if there's a tornado and you need to tell people to get to shelter, then you have that button you can press. But it's something that's once again not done lightly. There are only specific individuals that are allowed to even send these notifications. You need a certain level of credentials to interact with it. The system is protected. It's treated pretty seriously in the country. When looking at what type of events normally are supposed to go into the NAD system and are supposed to interact with Alert Ready, I've broken this down into 4 categories. These aren't the same sort of 4 categories or different categories that you'll often see online, but when viewing them through an emergency management lens or a risk reduction lens or a disaster risk reduction lens, I think that these are about the right 4 categories to think about it, but there could be an academic disagreement on that. The way I'm structuring this is opinionated, but the content itself is not. This is what's pushed. The first category for things that would go into Alert Ready is any hazard that could result in a disaster that is a significant threat to the public. And this is the primary function of Alert Ready. So when you look at the Canadian Disaster Database and you look at the different categories for things we have, anything that sort of fits into one of those categories where the hazard is believed that it could basically result in something being put on that list would qualify for an Alert Ready. So just because you have a tornado doesn't actually technically mean that it's enough. It has to be a tornado that is expected to hit a bunch of people and risk the population. If you have a tornado show up in the middle of the whole storm system effectively is in the middle of an uninhabited part of the woodland, the forest in Canada, then you're not pushing an Alert Ready for this. It has to be a significant threat to public safety that is a significant risk to the public. And generally it's more than one person. It needs to be the public is in danger, multiple people, and the notification goes wider the bigger the group of people that are impacted. And this covers everything, right? This could be terrorism. This could be something that's a national security threat in general. This could be the tornado. This could be a flood. Like this is anything, but the common thread is the public is in danger. The second is if there's something very, very localized that wouldn't necessarily meet the broader public threat, but you can sort of target Alert Ready. So if you have a bunch of dangerous wildlife that have entered a neighborhood and you can Alert Ready push to just that neighborhood and say, look, there's a whole bunch of wild animals coming through that are, aggressive, high risk of you guys all being injured. They're threatening your safety. Then Alert Ready can be pushed to a very specific localized area. That approval is a bit more specific and a bit more nuanced because you have to really drill down on the specific area, but it can be used for that too. The third thing is things that affect emergency response systems. If 911 is offline, if you can't actually call 911, just because you can't call 911 doesn't mean that the weather network is down. So this emergency system can still push a notification if 911 is down because they're different systems. This can be used so that if you have a major 911 outage, for example, you're able to hit button, by the way, this doesn't work, so that people know that. This is not a direct threat to public safety, but it affects the entire public's ability to interact with the safety system. So I would argue from an emergency management point of view, hey, the way that you communicate with emergency services, that's offline now. That's a pretty good use of a, hit the button system, especially because of how much 911 is integrated with society normally anyways. Like most people in Canada grow up with, are, socialized on, if something happens, your life is in danger, call 911. Don't worry about fixing the problem, 911 is coming. That sort of idea. And if that doesn't work, that sort of changes things, right? And then number 4 is Amber Alerts. So Amber Alerts are given a special basically category, kind of like an exemption, where they wouldn't normally sort of fit within this sort of structure or system. But because it's like a special program and we've said, you know what, it's integrated with policing already, there's imminent threat of someone being harmed, it goes in there. Also, in the case of Amber Alerts, technically, the individual who has abducted the child or abducted the vulnerable person that is at risk of harming them, there's an increased risk that they are unreasonable and violent and that they themselves are the threat to public safety. So in the case of Amber Alerts, you have the risk of an uncivil individual that could be a threat to the public, whereas in the case of a nice old person who wanders off and is at risk of accidentally harming themselves, there's no individual that's a threat to the public in this situation, right? If a 4-year-old, walks out of their home and wanders down the street and you're concerned about finding them, the public isn't in danger. The child surely is, but the public isn't in danger. In the case of a violent kidnapper, the public could be in danger. The police find them, and then there's a violent altercation, if there's weapons involved, etc. It's different. Hopefully that, you're kind of picking up what I'm putting down, that makes sense. So there's the argument that for Amber Alerts, you have that human-caused hazard risk that actually threatens the public, potentially. So they're slightly different. That's essentially Alert Ready. I wanted to give you an idea for the sorts of categories that go into it. I'm going to have us play now the sound notification that you'll hear when Alert Ready comes out, so you can get this for context. And we'll bring up some example images of sort of like Alert Ready notifications look like when they show up on your phone or your TV or etc. Keep in mind that this, for many people, this sound notification will be very obnoxious. So what I'm going to do is we'll have me count down, you'll hear it, and then when it's over, we'll kind of give you a few seconds for no sound pausing or something, so that if you want to skip over it, you can, or if you want to use timestamps, you can do it for that. So just keep that in mind. So we'll count down until Alert Ready notification sound in 3, 2, 1, go. Cool. Hopefully that's good for timestamping for you guys. I know some people might have been irritated by very loud sounds like that. So that's the sort of sound that comes out for people. So Alert Ready is pretty in your face. It's like, hey, pick up the phone. Other alerting systems that exist, and I want to talk about this too, because there's conversations around, well, what exists already to solve this issue? What do we have for missing children where someone hasn't been abducted, right? So what exists around here? Now, the two that immediately come to mind are vulnerable persons registries and the child search network. A vulnerable persons registry is when, if you have a child with specific special needs where they're at higher risk of, if they wander off on their own, becoming lost, very distressed, harmed, etc. Or if, an elderly person that has similar risks with an elderly person with dementia, for example, that may wander off and, have a very, very, very bad day, be very distressed. When you have certain types of vulnerable persons, there are registries. So you can voluntarily basically sign them up to be tracked, so that if police come across them, or if somebody else that has access to these registries, usually police, come across them, they can pull up the information and go, oh, this is who this is. Oh, they have this condition, this. Oh, here's a note. When interacting with them, make sure to do this, don't do this, right? It's basically a resource so that when something happens, when they're found, context can more easily be provided. This is done as a sort of prevention or mitigation measure as far as risk controls are concerned on the fore end, in case they get lost, in case they go missing, etc. So vulnerable person registries are really, really good for this. In my experience, they're pretty easy to access. The systems are fairly well developed. You can always improve on anything, but they're very good. That's quite helpful. Also, when it comes to putting information out to the public, if there's a registry that already has this, then when it comes to police sending the notification to whoever to send out social media blasts or what have you, it's already in a database they can more quickly format and the message gets out faster. So registries are good. So those exist. Now, the Child Search Network is something that is run by the Missing Children Society of Canada. This is a specific thing that exists in Canada, but other countries have things that are similar. Unlike the Vulnerable Persons Registry, what this thing does is it's a system that helps police move messaging out to the public in the event of missing children. So this is more of a response after the event has happened, after they've gone missing. This is like a response utility. If you're using Alert Ready, you don't really need these as much because it's just blasting it everywhere. Well, you still could because it's just more information, but this is being done because the Alert Ready system isn't being used by and large the same way. And the Alert Ready system will not give the same sort of detail also that this sort of thing can. This messaging can be, the Missing Children Society messaging and through Child Search Network can be more detailed than the quick thing you're getting on your phone. In general, when a child goes missing, at minimum, currently, they will put out a social media blast that the child is missing anyways. So you'll see Twitter/X, usually Twitter/X. Sometimes they'll update on YouTube channels with some local police departments, but usually we're talking Twitter/X, Instagram, etc. They'll put out, their social media department will put out, X child is missing. These are details. If you have seen blah, 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 please call this number. That's usually the method that's used. But if you're someone that doesn't interact with social media, the message doesn't get to you, right? And then they'll also blast to traditional media as well. So sometimes on local news stations, you'll see the bottom bottom of the news, the line of news feed thing, child age da-da-da is missing, etc., or pictures will show up in between programs. They'll integrate with that. Okay, so that was all context, giving you background on these different systems that exist. Here's some analysis. We'll give my thoughts after, but some just sort of general analysis on this. Emergency notification, being able to send messaging around, is a huge part of emergency management. This is massive. On the channel, we talk about emergency management, we talk about disaster risk reduction, we talk about sort of resiliency as the overall umbrella in general. Specifically to the emergency management piece, and we've talked about this quite a bit in the Continuity 101 playlist, and especially in the early part where we go over the differences between these things. But in emergency management, a lot of what you're doing is dealing with the consequences of the bad thing that's happened, and you're trying to bring order back to chaos. A huge component of that is communications infrastructure, is being able to talk to people, is being able to send messages out. Having you the great solution about having shelters and doing X, Y, and Z for a flood is great, but if you can't explain it to the public, then it doesn't really matter. When power goes out, when telecommunications goes down, one of the, if not the first priority after making sure the people putting it together aren't going to die, like ensuring their safety, is getting communication systems back up and running. It's really, really critical to emergency management. This is their wheelhouse, period. And when you're talking about the Alert Ready system, this is, once again, the biggest, just push it, get it to everybody resource for emergency management in Canada specifically. When you look at who's allowed to even send these notifications, you're usually talking about the provincial or federal emergency management agencies themselves that will get the requests, that are filtering the approval. This is emergency management. This is their jurisdiction, okay? The thing that's going to keep coming up when you talk about should we or should we not integrate missing children into Alert Ready systems or into these emergency management systems that kind of force messages to everybody, is something called alert fatigue. Alert fatigue, it's kind of like the boy who cried wolf. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the boy who cried wolf story, but I've basically succinct it down into this sort of like little spoiler line. A boy basically repeatedly pranks the town by yelling wolf when there is no wolf. After repeated sessions of this, the town basically gets frustrated. Then, a wolf does appear, and the boy cries and says, "Hey, there's wolf." And then by this point, the town is so fatigued, they don't believe him and don't show up. And then the wolf kills him. So that's basically the boy who cried wolf. This is a lesson that you teach to children in folk tales, among the many different folk tales that are actually, if you think about it later in life, quite gruesome, that you teach to children, to teach them not to lie because there could be disastrous consequences. And in this case, not to troll with something that is a public safety utility. In this case, this would be emergency notification, crying wolf, hey, there's an emergency. Don't just waste people's time doing that when there isn't an emergency, or they won't believe you when there is an emergency. Now, in this case, it comes back to harm the boy, but if you kind of zoom out, that's sort of the argument that's being made here. Anytime you use an emergency notification system that is this aggressive and there isn't actually a disaster that happens or a serious hazard that people have to be worried about, you run into the risk of increasing alert fatigue. The problem is that when you look at this through an emergency management lens, we have problems with alert fatigue even when there is a disaster. So let's say there's a Category 4 hurricane going to hit Florida or Louisiana or one of the places in the United States that frequently has them. And then you send out an evacuation notice and say, hey, there's going to be a hurricane. But the last 2 times there were hurricanes, and there were actually hurricanes and people did die, that person's house over there was technically fine. So you send out the notification and there is an actual hurricane, but the last 2 times it didn't kill them and they were good. They say, I don't want to evacuate. You deal with alert fatigue in this even when there is an active threat. It's very difficult. Alert fatigue is taken very, very seriously as a risk from the perspective of emergency management. So when you take that and then you go, okay, but what about events that they're not realistically going to be a danger to the person, probably, but we're trying to utilize it to resolve this thing faster? Emergency management gets a bit more hesitant. They go, well, they're in their home, they're safe. Should we really be pushing the Amber Alert there using this system? There's debates on both ends. Go a step further. there's no actual threat to the public, do we want to risk fatiguing the public to maybe not respond to the tornado threat because of over inundating them with information about the abducted child? This is the risk that people in this field are concerned about. They don't want people to turn off Alert Ready. Now, it's not simple to turn off Alert Ready, but it is possible. And if someone is sufficiently irritated by Alert Ready, they will find out how to ignore it. And once they're ignoring it, they're not receiving the notification. Every time someone feels that their time has been wasted, this risk increases. Now, having said that, there is the counter argument, and one that I've heard directly from police, for example, where essentially they're happy to use any resource that will help them find a missing child. And frankly, if someone publicly disagrees with them, they have said publicly, "That's nice, we don't care." They basically go, "I'm happy that you're dissatisfied, but I'm trying to find a missing child. How about you just go be quiet over there?" Right? That's basically their response to this. And I get that. And I think a lot of people will share that sentiment, especially people who are worried about their own children potentially going missing and wanting this resource there. People will resonate with that. But there is a disagreement here. And when you have sort of the impossible or, laudable or whatever word you want to use, goal of saving everyone, you're still concerned about the few people that are the most disagreeable with the system. When you're trying to help those people, these are the sorts of things that you have to worry about. Okay. So I think I've pretty well outlined a lot of this. Hopefully you can see where the arguments are coming from on either end and why someone would argue for any one of these different solutions being sort of a yes or no, because I think there are valid arguments to make on each. That's mostly what's in the public right now that I've seen. I'm now going to provide my feedback on this, or sort of my opinion on the way this should be done and the way that I'm viewing this. Some of this is going to be opinionated, specifically my perspective on what we should be doing, but the information that's going into why I'm viewing this, that's information's information. You could interpret it differently, right? When I look at this, I view this a bit differently than the way the public did initially, from what I can see. The first thing that I do when looking at any sort of problem, challenge, risk is I scope it. I look at the size of the issue. I figure out, okay, how big is this thing? And for me, the question then becomes, how many children per year go missing, not because of abduction, and end up becoming deceased? It's not how many missing children are there, and it's not how many children are deceased. It's how many specifically go missing and are deceased, and Amber Alerts are not relevant. What is that number? Because that is the number that you're trying to basically impact in a positive way, not increase, decrease the number, but have more children survive. What is that? How big is the problem, right? So that's actually a really hard number to figure out. I tried to find the exact number for this, and it wasn't that easy to find. I found like a higher range than what the number maximally could be, but I think the easiest way to find that number would be to sort of scrape all of the news articles of every publication in the country and try to find every report of a child that was found deceased, and then make sure that you find the backstory and find that it wasn't an abduction. But I didn't have the time to go through 20 years of every news report ever to find that. So I'm not sure what that number is. That would tell you sort of the lower end, because those would be confirms. But I found out roughly what I think the higher end is. But there's going to be a range here. So if you were to look at the total number of children that go missing, not due to abduction, and then you see a news report about them, the number is probably 20 or less across all of Canada per year, just by news reports. But if you go through, the higher number, what I did for that was I looked at, one, the number of reported missing people per year in Canada, which was 67 to 68,000. So that tells me the number of missing people in general. Now, because this doesn't look at children only, it also looks at vulnerable persons. So if you have someone who's older that has a condition where they'd still be in this sort of category, I had to look at the non-child number as has like a whole range too, because there's also that. So you're looking at 67 to 68,000 people reported missing. 88% of those people are found within 7 days. Now, when it says they're found, it didn't actually qualify if they were found alive or not. It just said found. So that was helpful, but not very helpful. Among all that number of 67 to 68,000, roughly 8,300 are long-term open missing person cases where we don't know what's happened. So you can see that that's the number that's remaining after you take the 88% out. There are 40 to 100 new cases of recovered or unidentified remains every year. Of the long-term number, you see about 40 to 100 every year of a resolution of them being deceased. With some more approximation, there are 34,000 missing children annually. 99% of those cases are resolved within weeks or days. Overwhelmingly, there are family disputes, runaways, or the children just return safely otherwise. So most of those cases of the 34,000 per year, the children are fine. So you're talking about a very specific number here. And this leaves roughly 300 to 500 missing children cases per year that are unresolved for longer than several months. This is like, look at the math, right? I know I can feel the memes that John's putting in right now. When looking at long-term incidents and how they're categorized as closed upon discovery of remains, because when you discover the remains, if it's a remain due to abduction or remain due to, that, then it doesn't work for this, because the abduction would have been an Amber Alert, right? 23% are categorized as accidents. 9% are just categorized as presumed dead. So that's ones where you don't find the remains, but you just assume they're dead. If we were to put those together and assume that all of the 9% are accidents, then you get 32% of that number of cases being closed with discovery of remains being something that would fit this category. You take all those numbers together, and what I got to was the higher limit, assuming that it's 500 children per year, assuming that it's every unresolved child case every year is a death. You add in the 23 plus the 9%. You assume Amber Alerts were issued in none of these cases. And you assume in every single case where an Amber Alert wasn't issued, if it was issued, the child would have miraculously survived. So if you assume the perfect scenario, then this is 160 children per year would be saved if we integrated this problem into Alert Ready or Amber Alerts. That's the maximum number, as best as I can tell. Yeah. Okay. So, you need to figure out what your number is, right? Now, I'm going to be honest. If the number was 5, it wouldn't meet Canadian Disaster Database standards. It wouldn't be a big enough number. There's a question as to something bad happens and we say, one life is too many. While that is a fun slogan, as far as policy is concerned, that's not the way the world works or things happen. You don't spend $500 million and overhaul a system and remove freedoms and do et cetera for one life. You don't. For 100 plus, you might. It depends. But you have to have a big enough number where it warrants a significant cost. And this is big enough where there's a conversation. So if it's the higher number, there could be a conversation about here. Or you get a really low cost. And then sure, if there's not a high cost, then you do it anyways. So we found out the best case position. The second thing that I look at with these sorts of things is the opportunity cost of doing the thing. So if you want to put a solution in, and we've talked about this in the Continuity 101 stuff, you don't make an emergency management or a continuity program that costs more than it saves. If you have a $10,000 risk, you don't spend $5 million on trying to fix the $10,000 risk. Your emergency program did more damage than you would have saved even if you got hit by the thing. So it's important to look at how much it's costing to fix the problem. Now, I don't look at cost just in terms of money. Like, you do look at financial cost, of course, because that could otherwise go to healthcare or otherwise go to infrastructure, whatever. That is a component. But also, you look at, does solving this problem, whatever the problem is, make it so you have a different problem? Or does it, make a different issue worse? Is there a trade-off here on lives being saved or what have you? Is there an erosion of the effectiveness of a different resource? What are the other impacts from doing this thing? And is it worth it? So I break down all that. From a cursory view, sort of looking at this, I roughly came to the conclusion on that Because there are so many long-term open cases with police, there is the potential that the increased notification reduces the number of those cases. That's reduced workload. And it is possible, to the point that I think likely, that the cost of increasing notifications to the public for missing persons will be less than the cost of having the open cases. So when you look at the opportunity cost on that element for this, it might be even better for the missing persons reports if you do them more, because of just the cost of long-term cases. So that's the first thing. The second thing, when you look at the cost of putting the notifications in themselves, Alert Ready already exists. You already have this whole system. You already have the formatting for it. The addition of inputs into the formatting, into a structure that already exists, it's not like you're building the whole thing from the ground up, or even if you were to build a new one from the ground up, you already have the map for how to do it. You're not reinventing the wheel from scratch. You're producing another one in a factory, or you're just adding in a little bit of an extra thing, right? Instead of painting the wheel green, you're painting the wheel blue, right? You're not reinventing something from scratch here. You're spending a whole bunch of money. You can actually probably do this for pretty low cost. So there's probably not much of a cost consideration here financially either, which is pretty interesting. That looks pretty good. Now, the issue, and I think that I do agree with emergency management people here, is that alert fatigue piece. Right now, there's one type of sound that comes through Alert Ready, and there's no distinction made between whatever it is, right? If it's an imminent threat where, you're at risk of dying in the next 5 seconds, or if it is a hurricane's coming in the next day, or if it's an Amber Alert or whatever, it's the same sound that plays. So the process of thing goes off, hey, I have to go look at it, before I find out what it is and read it, everything else is the same in every case. There's no difference. That is a problem, I think. Well, maybe not. But from my perspective, if you had different types of notifications for different levels of severity, then you could separate out the alert fatigue, and there would be, I think, a better argument as to integrating sort of less severe events into this sort of system. Like right now, there's no difference. If you were to add missing children that are not abducted to the Alert Ready system, there is no difference in notification between missing child and nuclear bomb is about to destroy your city. There's no difference. That, in my view, is an issue. So I think that there is something to be said about the alert fatigue piece and a solution being put through there. I've talked about this a bit before, but from my mind, and this is where I'm going to get into a more heavy opinion piece here, the Alert Ready system is a public safety utility fundamentally. It's not really a help this one person out sort of utility. It's a try to make sure that everybody is safe resource. In expanding it into not fulfilling its primary function, it runs the risk of diluting it or making it worse at fulfilling its primary function. That is a challenge. I don't personally think I am comfortable with that when we don't have a different resource. So as it stands right now, I don't think that integrating this into the Alert Ready system, or even potentially into the Amber Alert system, is appropriate. I could hear a pretty strong argument that the Amber Alert system doesn't actually potentially belong in Alert Ready either, and there could be a serious debate on that. However, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't have mass notifications for things. There should be a solution for this that keeps everybody happy, where you don't have the same risk of alert fatigue, where we still get better at finding missing children. I think there is some way that we can kind of do both. When I looked at this, thought of different proposals, I think that we have 2, 3 maybe different sort of solutions for this that I think will work. One, if Alert Ready was expanded on a bit to include different types of notifications, you would only really have to change the audio cue too. So you would have audio cue 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2. If you hear this sort of cue, it's imminent, we're all gonna die, you have to read this, what's wrong with you, hello, if you have that. Then you have a second tier of threat to public safety, pay attention. And then you have third tier of emergency services wants you to read this because we need your help. You have those sort of different types of stratifications, then I think it would solve this. The problem with that is now you're introducing complexity to a system, and it requires a bit of public training. And it is notoriously difficult to train the public on anything. And the decision might have already been basically made that the public is not capable of realistically responding to more than one sound. And if that is the case, then you just don't do it anyways. Yeah, So if it's believed that the public cannot reasonably be expected to respond to more than one audio cue, then you can't. But if they can, then you could stratify it a bit. This is a training challenge or an education challenge. The second solution, I think, would be to integrate this missing children thing into it anyways and just risk the alert fatigue, but use it as I said at the beginning of the video, use it as an exercise, essentially. We do run once a year or a bit more often in some jurisdictions, trial runs of the alert ready system to make sure that it works and to make sure that people are receiving notifications. If instead of that, we just use some of these incidents that don't normally fit the scope of the system to test the system, then, you could do that. So set up the infrastructure to be able to grab the data you would be grabbing from tests and then just use these as the tests. It's more organic anyways. I think that this would probably be a better way to run the exercising regardless. You have enough missing children where you'll have one a year to run in most jurisdictions. So this could be done. I think this is pretty reasonable. I don't have much issue there. Having said that, if it turns out that it's like 100 a year and it's too many, people get fatigued, then you can't. So you have to find out how many of these exercises would we be running, and is it too many? And then the third solution that I would come up with would be augmenting other systems like the Child Search Network and creating something separate to that. I think could work as well. If you separated it from Alert Ready entirely, but you just made that notification system better, or if you had them send something separately that maybe could push through people's phones, but it was a different audio cue than Alert Ready so that those could be separated. You really don't want to impact the ability for people to respond to massive disasters in a negative way. So if you could separate that, but still get the message through to people, that would probably be fine. I think when it comes down to the debate between people being irritated and finding a missing child, the Canadian public is generally going to side with finding the missing child and will be okay with the intrusiveness of the system notification. There will be a few individuals that will be fairly loud and disagree with the idea and not want to hear the blaring sound. But by and large, from how I understand Canadians, those people will likely be socially shunned or said, well, we don't care what your opinion is, so we're just going to do it anyways because we want to find the children, right? Like that's going to be basically what people say. That's my prediction. So I know, long video. Interesting topic, fed directly into emergency management things. Hopefully you learned some stuff about that. Interested to hear your thoughts and what other sorts of systems that you'd interact with in your country if you're not in Canada. Hopefully, if you're a policymaker or, the family watching this, if so, my condolences. Hopefully this was helpful or informative. And looking forward to a solution that everybody comes up with that helps everybody involved. Have a great day, guys, and we'll see you next time.